Now that I've got the front seats all done, it's time to attack this rear seat. As you can see, I already got the top half of the seat out. It's sitting over on my my workbench slash hot tub. But kind of digging in here and figuring out how all this stuff goes together. And one thing I'm looking at is this piece of plywood that kind of makes up the engine enclosure. And as you can see, it's in pretty bad shape down there. And this lower section of the seat back mostly just screws right into that board. Same with the supports for our little, I don't know, storage compartments there. They just screw into the back of it. You can actually see a couple screws sticking through. So that wood's in pretty sad shape. So I think I'm actually gonna take all that out, take that piece out, go get another piece of marine plywood and cut out a new piece and see if we can't start fresh. So that'll be one project. That red wire there, it's going to looks like a water pump or repurposed fuel pump they set up for the freshwater tank back there that supplies the sink up in the dash. Haven't decided what to do there. The pump doesn't seem to work. I'm not really sure what it was connected to anyway, so I'm probably just going to pull that wire out for now. Not like we have a lot of use for a sink on this thing, but yeah, gonna get back to work. Back over to our workbench hot tub now. Got the upper section of the rear seat. It's all plywood, it looks like, going around, but there's a board here. It steps out, and it actually, that plywood I showed that's all rotten actually sits right here. This thing's upside down right now. So this piece sits on the top edge of that plywood, which is why it's actually felt pretty solid, even though it only things holding it in were that little screw right there and the same one on the opposite side. So the way it sits in there, it's really simple, but it's pretty solid. So I'm going to start pulling all the staples out now, get this cover off, see if I can carefully pull it apart to pattern it just like I did on the front seats. And here, there's our stripes. Really simple way of doing that too. It's just, you know, some strips sewn together and then it was just wrapped around. You can see this one's still on here. It's just wrapped around the seat cushion and stapled. So I've already sewn together some new stripes that are going to go up the center to match the front seats and match that swim deck I did. So I'm going to start pulling staples. Fun. Well, a few hundred staples later, we've got the cover off. So this thing's pretty old and crusty, just like everything else. The wood's pretty dried out. But yeah, actually, most of the staples I was able to just grab the cloth and lift up and the staples came right out. So I'm hoping that when I go to put the new ones in, they hold a little better. Probably gonna run a sander across here just to smooth off the rough edges. Hopefully once it's all wrapped up, everything will be solid again. So now I'm gonna take this cover inside and start carefully dissecting all the seams, taking it apart, and cross my fingers that I can get a good pattern off of it. Alright, I'm back inside in the air conditioning now. Ran out of space in my living room, so I had to pull the coffee table out of there, roll out this big sheet. If you'll notice, well, first off, obviously I've got all the various pieces of the back seat separated, which was no easy task. There are several French seams in there, and unlike the front seats where they didn't actually sew in a backer, they just folded it over and stitched it. This one they actually doubled it up like you're supposed to with the extra tape and then stitched it in. And with how old and just kind of frayed and fried this vinyl is, it was making it really hard to just cut the stitches out. So I ended up just carefully going around with scissors and a razor knife and cutting all the pieces off, which of course means that on a lot of them I've cut off my my seam allowance, so I'm gonna have to go back and add a 1/2 inch to all those edges for where they actually get stitched together. But you'll also notice there's a couple of really wide pieces. Those are the top and bottom, but the other pieces, those were originally just 2 pieces, but I cut them in half because the way they were laid out, there was just no way to get everything on the piece of vinyl without just a lot of fabric waste. And now that I am going to be changing the stripes are going to go right up the center, just like on the sun deck. Now those stripes go up the center, they cover up the middle of the seat, so I'm going to cut everything as separate pieces left and right, and then I'll do a French seam up the middle, stitch them all together, and then when the stripes go on, you'll never see the seam again. It'll be all hidden. And we'll make much better use of our roll of vinyl. So I'm gonna get with the Sharpie and start tracing all this stuff out, and then we'll get cutting and stitching. Man, this has to be the most tedious part of this process. Trying to get all the old pieces to lie down flat and get them spread out. A lot of these ones I had to manually go back and add the seam allowance onto them. I think I got them all laid out here. There's 2 pieces that aren't drawn on there. They're basically mirror images of the 2 small pieces. I used the old ones and set them out. There should be plenty of room in that big open area in the middle for them. But I want to cut out the new ones and actually use those as a template so that I can have 2 symmetrical pieces to sew together. So I'm going to start cutting now. Maybe I'll be ready to sew, I don't know, by midnight. Well, I'm not sure what time it is, but it feels like it's late. I'm tired. My knees hurt crawling around on this floor. But I did start getting a little sewing done, so you can see my 2 middle pieces that started out as 4 pieces. I got stitched together. And then the very bottom piece I got stitched on there. So I think I'm gonna call it a night. The next couple seams are gonna be a little bit more tricky to do. This is actually the orientation they all go in. It's kind of a weird shaped cushion, but both of those full length seams are gonna be double top stitch French seams, just like the middle one there. So that's actually 3 rows of stitching that you've got to do, and 2 of them have to look good. So I think I'm going to call it for the night so I can come back fresh and not screw it up just because I'm tired. So bedtime, and I'll come back tomorrow. Alright, day 2. Back to stitching together the back seat cover. I wanted to talk a little bit about the different stitches I'm doing here. So this is the very bottom panel here, and I'm just doing a single top stitch there, which basically you just stitch the 2 pieces together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then you fold over the seam and then run a second stitch along there, and that's the one that's visible. So that one's really easy to do, makes a pretty strong seam. But the more difficult one I'm working on is the double top stitch, which comes out looking like this, also known as a French seam. So this one, you actually take the 2 pieces. Yeah, here I've just done 1 stitch. So you you've got your tail here, and you actually spread it apart, you fold it flat, and then you take a strip of material. They make a ribbon for this. I'm actually just using more of the same vinyl, just because, hey, I've got a lot of it. It's convenient. So I'm just cutting it into 1-inch strips. And when you fold it open, you put that ribbon down, and then you sew it all together. You do 2 more stitches, 1 on each side of the middle seam there. Looks really nice, and it's really strong because you get that doubled up piece of fabric there. The tough part is getting everything lined up in the sewing machine. So what I've been doing here is just opening up that seam and laid the double stick tape all the way down the center where we want the seam to be. And then as I peel it back, I'm just rolling that strip of fabric down into there, sticking it in place. As you can see, I've already done a section here. So that holds it pretty solid. And then I can just run it through the sewing machine. And when I'm all done, backside looks like that. And hopefully we get a nice looking seam on the outside. Alright, I'm getting close on this first big long French seam on the back seat. See, I got a whole pile of material stacked up there. What I'm doing is basically just lining up that middle seam with the presser foot on the sewing machine and using that as a guide. I already did the one side. Came out alright. So now I'm just gonna keep going with this side and see how it goes. Alright, kind of hard to do one-handed, so put the camera down. And this is where things get tricky. You start getting into sewing larger pieces together. Yeah, somehow I have to pass all of that through there. Well, biggest chunk of sewing so far is now finished. I didn't show it earlier, there's these little kind of chevron shaped end caps. Goes around the end of the seat. It was definitely a challenge having something so long, and of course we're doing all these French seams, so you got really long seams that we're trying to make look good, which was a challenge, but I feel like we did all right. These end caps are actually one of the harder parts to put on. I was kind of surprised, just because you've got so many different angles. I ended up having to actually do 4 completely separate lines of stitching on there to pull them all together. I had thought I was just going to be able to kind of set it on there and run the sewing machine all the way around in one shot, and that was not the case. But got all finished up, and I'm going to bring it out to the hot tub, start stapling it all in place. Well, that's one more piece of the puzzle finished up. So we actually got the seat back in there yesterday and went out on the water, had a great day with some friends. Looks like all the wrinkles in the corners kind of went away, figured themselves out there. This piece was definitely more of a pain than any of the others to get the cover on there and stapled and get it all stretched out. For a while there it was looking like it was just not gonna come out nice, and just keep tugging and pulling and stapling and shifting and messing with it. So I still need to put the stripes on there. Those just kind of wrap around and staple in place, but unfortunately I ran out of staples. So that'll be the next step once I get more staples in. But yeah, coming along. So the next step is do that that middle section of the seat, and unfortunately, to do that, we need to replace this front piece of plywood from the engine compartment because it's just coming apart and it's in really sad shape, and I think it's time. So I picked up a piece of plywood, and that's probably the next thing I'm gonna do on the boat, because I gotta take that middle section out. And we're gonna take the plywood out. I gotta replace the plywood before I can put it back in. So do it all kind of together. So as always, on to the next thing.